Amber's cheek still throbbed from Damien's slap when she stumbled into the Monarch, a bar that felt less like shelter and more like a trap she couldn't see yet. The owner, Frank Costello, slid her a whiskey with tattooed hands that had clearly done more than pour drinks, his cold eyes reading every bruise on her face like a language he knew too well. What she didn't know was that the crowned raven glinting behind the bar wasn't just decoration. It was a warning, and she'd just walked into the den of Brooklyn's most feared Mafia boss. The rain hit like shards of glass as Amber Rose stumbled down the cracked sidewalks of Brooklyn, her breath ragged against the chill, one hand pressed to her cheek where Damien's slap still throbbed like a fresh bruise. Each drop stung her frayed nerves, already raw from fear and the hollow ache of betrayal. Her thin sweater clung to her soaked skin, useless against the autumn downpour that clawed at the city like a living thing. 3 hours earlier, she had bolted from Damien's apartment with nothing but a torn purse, a cracked phone, and the clothes on her back. 3 hours of blind flight through shadowed alleys and unfamiliar blocks, clawing distance from the man who had charmed her into chains for 4 relentless years. The wind howled through the brownstones, whipping sheets of water that erased her footprints in the gutters. Every step was a choked gasp. Every puddle splashed a frantic echo. She didn't know where she was headed, only that she had to outrun Damien, outrun that velvet voice masking cruelty behind closed doors, outrun those eyes that had once made her believe she was the one fracturing. A flicker cut the gloom ahead, a neon pulse through the torrent. The words, "The Monarch," glowed like a smoldering coal in the night. Its amber light fractured across the slick pavement, scattering into glints like shattered whiskey. Amber's chest tightened, hunger gnawing since dawn. She craved shelter, something sharp to steady her pulse, a shadowed corner to unravel the knot of what now. That was all. Her shaking fingers gripped the heavy wooden door. A wave of heat rushed out, laced with oak smoke, aged bourbon, and a faint tang of polished brass. She crossed the threshold, every inch of her screaming intruder, drenched waves of blonde hair plastered to her neck, red sweater heavy as chainmail, the purple bloom on her cheek a stark flag under the low lamps, the space unfolded like a secret kept too long, crimson drapes veiling the walls, brass fixtures dripping honeyed glow over scarred oak counters, high-backed stools cradling the quiet like old confessions. A murmur of muted blues drifted from hidden speakers, slow and sinuous. Here, the frenzy outside dissolved, as if the storm had bowed at the door. Amber froze, pulse thundering, until a voice sliced the hush, low and edged, like stone under silk. "Rough night?" The man behind the bar loomed steady, broad in a white tank that bared the ink coiling over his forearms, dragons and thorns etched in midnight. His eyes, sharp as a blade's edge, pinned her without mercy. Amber swallowed, voice a scrape. "You could say that." He tilted his head, gaze tracing her tremble. "Take a stool. I'll fix something to cut the cold." She eased onto the leather perch, the bar's edge a lifeline under her palms. She shrugged off her sodden sweater, the fabric slapping wet against the footrail. Her phone blinked 4%, 9 missed calls from Damien, each a venomous barb. She flipped it face down, willing the quiver from her fingers. He returned, sliding a tumbler her way, amber liquid catching the light, neat and unyielding. "On the house," he said. "You carry enough weight already." Amber curled her hands around the glass, the burn blooming through her veins like the first honest breath in ages. "Thanks," she murmured, unsure if it was to him, to the ghosts she'd outrun, or to the fractured woman staring back from the polished surface. What she couldn't sense yet was that the door she'd forced open wasn't just a bar's welcome. It was the veiled arch into a realm of oaths and shadows, where she'd unearth a fire she thought long extinguished, the grit to claim a life unbound, even as peril coiled in the rafters. If you're still with Amber in the rain's relentless drum and the fragile glow of the Monarch, you might taste it too. That electric hush before the unraveling. Before we slip deeper into her nights, where old wounds bleed into fresh alliances under these brass-lit eaves, hit that subscribe. Drop a like if her flight stirs something in you. Share this with someone who's stared down their own storm. And where are you tuning in from? Comment below. Tell me from what rain-soaked edge of the world the monarch has pulled you in tonight. Have you ever crossed a threshold like hers, where one shadowed door cracked open the map to who you could become? Amber hunched over the bar, the tumbler's warmth threading into her bones, thawing the ice that had locked her ribs for hours. Rivulets trailed from her cuffs onto the oak, silent scars of a dash without destination. Outside, the downpour thrashed the panes, a jealous roar bent on swallowing every whisper. But within these walls, silence reigned like a guarded vow, as if the city's underbelly had paused to listen. She raised her eyes, tracing the veins of the place. No raucous crowds, no sour reek of regret, no hollow cheers. The monarch hummed like a confessional veiled in velvet, for souls bartering escape. Each fixture seemed etched with intent, spilling russet pools over the counter's grain, burnished as if by secrets alone. In that velvet truce, Amber sensed she'd breached a border unmarked on any grid, a hollow no hunter could breach. Her gaze snagged on the emblem etched into the glass behind him, a crowned raven, wings flared in quiet dominion. The whiskey's fire had ebbed into a dull ember by the time Amber's eyelids grew heavy, the bar's hush wrapping around her like a reluctant embrace. She didn't remember sliding off the stool, only the world tilting sideways, her temple meeting the cool leather of the booth's arm as exhaustion claimed her. No dreams came, just a void, black as the rain beyond the windows, pulling her under without mercy. When she surfaced, it was to the scent of fresh grounds, bitter and grounding, cutting through the fog of sleep. Her cheek pressed against something softer than worn hide, a threadbare throw blanket tucked with a care that felt foreign. The back room was dim, lit by a single brass lamp that cast long shadows across exposed brick walls. A cot hugged one corner, its frame groaning faintly under her weight. She lay there, bones aching like they'd been borrowed from someone older, her sweater still damp and twisted around her ribs. Footsteps approached, measured and unhurried, the kind that announced themselves without apology. Amber's eyes snapped open, her body coiling tight as a spring. But the figure in the doorway didn't loom or lunge. It was him, the man from behind the bar, sleeves rolled higher now, revealing the full scroll of ink that vanished beneath his collar. Serpents twisting into crowns, thorns blooming from bare skin. His face was all hard planes and shadowed jaw, eyes the color of storm clouds holding back thunder. Not gentle, no, but not cruel either. Just present. "Coffee," he said, setting a chipped mug on the side table with a soft clink. Steam curled up like a question unspoken. He didn't hover, didn't pry. Just straightened, hands loose at his sides, watching her with that dissecting gaze. She pushed herself up, wincing at the pull in her neck, the faint throb where Damien's fingers had dug in last. The mug warmed her palms as she cradled it, the bitterness sharp on her tongue, chasing away the night's residue. "I passed out," she murmured, voice rough as gravel. Heat flooded her cheeks, not from the drink, but from the vulnerability of it all, collapsing like driftwood in a stranger's lair. He nodded once, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over the broad slab of his chest. The white tank stretched taut, every line of him speaking of restrained force. "Happens when the tank runs dry." No pity in his tone, just fact. Like he'd seen 100 souls wash up on his shore and knew the tide would either recede or drag them under. Amber sipped again, the silence stretching between them like a tightrope. She waited for the questions, the who, the why, the how long will you be a problem, but they never came. Instead, he pushed off the frame, turning halfway toward the door. "You can stay until you figure things out. Room's yours, no strings." She blinked, the words landing soft but solid, a lifeline tossed without fanfare. Why? It slipped out before she could cage it, laced with the suspicion that had kept her alive these past hours. His shoulders shifted, a ghost of a shrug. Because some nights the door opens for a reason. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him like a seal on a vault. From the narrow window above the bar, Frank Costello watched the rain taper to a drizzle, the streets below slick and gleaming under sodium lamps. The monarch slept in the gray hours before dawn, its pulse slow, waiting for the city's veins to thrum again. He wiped down the counter with a rag that had seen better decades, the motion automatic, a ritual to keep his hands busy when his mind wandered too far. She was still in the back, Amber, though he hadn't asked her name yet. Names came later, if they came at all. What stuck was the fire in her eyes when she'd walked in, drowned rat though she was. Not the wide-eyed fragility he was used to scraping off the floor. No, this one had claws sheathed but ready, the kind of quiet defiance that turned heads in a room full of ghosts. It pulled at something buried deep, a scar that never quite healed. Lucia. The name flickered unbidden, sharp as a blade's edge. His sister, all sharp wit and sharper temper, who'd laughed like thunder until that bastard dulled her light. Frank had been too late then, off handling business, as if empires meant a damn when family bled out on a kitchen tile. He'd found her after, the air thick with copper and regret, her eyes staring at nothing. The man? Gone by morning. Swallowed by the river, courtesy of a debt that couldn't be paid in blood alone. He paused, rag still in his grip, staring at the crowned raven etched into the mirror behind him. The monarch wasn't just wood and whiskey. It was the nerve center, the velvet glove over his iron fist. By day, a haven for the weary. By night, the shadowed boardroom where deals were carved in whispers and sealed in lead. His men, loyal shadows in tailored wool, called him Boss Costello in the back alleys, where the air tasted of gun oil and unspoken oaths. Here, he was just Fran, the steady hand pouring shots and secrets in equal measure. But Amber? She didn't fit the pattern. No wide-eyed plea for a handout. No calculated flirt to buy time. Just raw edges and a bruise blooming like a warning on her cheek. He saw Lucia in the set of her jaw, the way she'd gripped that glass like it was a weapon. Strength like that didn't beg for rescue. It demanded space to sharpen. And in his line, space was the rarest currency. A low murmur from the front pulled him back. Marco, his right hand, slipping in early to count the till and count favors owed. "Boss," Marco said, voice pitched low. "You see the ghost last night? Looked like trouble followed her in." Frank's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on the rag. Trouble finds its own way out. He didn't elaborate. Marco knew better than to push. But as the first patrons trickled in, tired dock workers nursing hangovers, a pair of suits murmuring about shipments that never saw daylight, Frank's gaze drifted to the back door. She was a wild card in a deck stacked for kings, and wild cards had a way of upending the table. Amber emerged as the lunch crowd thinned, the bar's rhythm a steady undercurrent now, clink of ice, murmur of half-truths, the blues saxophone weaving through it all like smoke. She felt exposed under the lights, her sweater traded for a spare flannel from the lost and found. Too big, hanging off her frame like borrowed armor. But it beat the chill, and the faint scent of cedar on the collar grounded her. Fran was behind the counter again, sleeves pushed up, muscles flexing as he polished glasses with efficient grace. He nodded once as she approached, sliding a stool her way without a word. The men at the back tables, 3 of them, broad and silent, nursing drinks that hadn't diminished, watched her slide onto the perch. Their eyes were flat, assessing, like hounds scenting a stranger in the pack. One adjusted his coat, the bulge beneath it unmistakable. Guns, or just the weight of secrets? You eat? Fran's voice cut through, low enough not to carry. She shook her head, stomach twisting at the thought. Not hungry. A lie, but pride was a thin shield. He didn't call it. Just turned, plating a sandwich from the cooler. Roast beef, thick and unpretentious, with a side of chips that crunched like brittle bones. Liar, he said, but there was no edge to it. He set it down, then leaned in, elbows on the oak. Close enough she could trace the fine lines at his eyes, the faint scar hooking his lip. Up close, the tattoos told stories. A dagger through a rose on one forearm, Latin script curling like a curse on the other. Memento mori. Remember you must die. Tension coiled in her gut, a familiar snake. His calm wasn't comfort. It was a still pond hiding currents that could drag you under. Those men in the corner, they didn't laugh, didn't banter. They watched. And Fran? He moved like he owned the air itself, every gesture deliberate, every silence loaded. Danger hummed in the space between his words, electric and unseen. Yet, she stayed. The sandwich warmed her from the inside. The first real food in too long, and with it came a treacherous ease. No demands, no dissecting stares, just the bar's low pulse, Fran's occasional glance that saw without stripping her bare. For the first time since Damien's apartment, the knot in her chest loosened a fraction. Safe? No, but sheltered maybe. In the eye of whatever storm this place brewed. As dusk bled into the windows, painting the room in bruised purples, Amber slipped upstairs to the guest room, a sparse nook above the bar, with a single bed and a window overlooking the alley. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and expectant. She drew the curtain aside, peering into the twilight. Black cars idled at the curb, sleek as sharks, their engines a low growl. Men in sharp suits clustered under the street lamp, faces obscured by fedoras and smoke. And there, at the center, was Fran, jacket slung over one shoulder, posture loose but commanding. Words passed in clipped tones, gestures sharp as knives. One suit nodded, deferential, slipping an envelope into Fran's hand. The crowned raven glinted on a lapel pin, catching the light. Amber's pulse kicked up, a wild thing against her ribs. This wasn't a bar. It was a throne room, veiled in amber and lies. She'd run from one monster's grip, only to stumble into another's den. The lion didn't roar here. He watched. And now, his eyes would turn her way. The crowned raven stared back at Amber from the lapel pin, its wings a frozen snarl in the street lamp's glare. She let the curtain fall, the fabric whispering against her fingers like a warning. Down below, the suits dispersed into the night, engines purring away like predators sated for now. Fran's silhouette lingered a moment longer, head tilted as if scenting the air for threats unseen. Then he vanished through the back door, swallowed by the bar's maw. Sleep came fitful after that, tangled in sheets that smelled faintly of mothballs and old smoke. Dreams clawed at her, Damien's hand cracking across her face, his laugh echoing like shattered glass. You're nothing without me, Rose. Who else would want this mess? She woke with a start before dawn, sweat slick and gasping, the guest room's walls pressing in like the apartment she'd fled. But the bar below hummed to life, a low vibration through the floorboards. Routine, anchor. She clung to it, pulling on the oversized flannel like armor, and descended. Fran was already there, stacking crates in the storeroom, his tank shadowed with sweat despite the chill. He glanced up, eyes flicking over her like he was cataloging fresh bruises. None showed, not visibly, but she felt them anyway, purple blooms fading to yellow ghosts on her ribs, her arms. Morning, he said, voice a rumble. No questions about the window, the cars, just a nod toward a stack of clean rags on the counter. Tables need wiping. Tips are yours if you want the work. She took it. Anything to keep her hands moving, her mind from circling back to the alley she'd run through. The monarch woke slowly. Chairs scraped into place, the espresso machine hissing like a kettle on the boil, the blues playlist kicking in with a sax that wailed low and mournful. The staff trickled in, Marco with his perpetual squint and scarred knuckles, Lena behind the register, her lipstick a slash of crimson that dared the world to test her. They treated Amber like a fragile heirloom, quiet respect laced with something sharper, like fear wrapped in velvet. Marco grunted approvals as she cleared glasses, sliding her a spare apron without a word. Lena's eyes lingered a beat too long when Amber passed, a flicker of "I know that" look before she turned away. But it was the details that gnawed at her edges. A coat slung over a chair, the leather creaking to reveal a holster's glint. Whispers between shifts, codes and glances, a thumb jerked toward the door meaning trouble's circling. No one explained. No one needed to. The air here carried weight, heavier than the smoke from Fran's occasional cigar, and Amber moved through it like she was learning a new language, one syllable at a time. Days blurred into a rhythm, the bar's pulse syncing with her own. Mornings, she scrubbed tables until the oak gleamed, erasing rings from forgotten nights. Afternoons, she tended bar under Fran's watchful eye, pouring drafts with a steadier hand, memorizing the well liquors like incantations. 2 fingers of bourbon, neat, twist, not splash. The work dulled the edges of her hunger, filled the hollow where doubt had rooted deep. But the ghosts followed her anyway, slipping in unbidden as she polished the brass rail. Flash, Damien's apartment, the one with the view she'd once called romantic. His fingers on her wrist, light as a lover's, tightening just enough to remind. "You're imagining it, babe. I didn't mean it like that. You're too sensitive. It's why I worry about you." Gaslight flickering in his eyes, the room spinning until she questioned the ground beneath her feet. 4 years of it. Compliments laced with barbs, apologies that bought silence, her reflection in the mirror shrinking smaller each time. Who are you without me? The question had become her mantra, a chain she wore until it scarred. She'd blink it away, suds foaming under her nails, the bar's honesty a stark counterpoint. Here, no pretty lies. The patrons were rough-edged, dock hands with calluses like armor, suits with eyes that calculated odds. They leered sometimes, testing, but the air crackled with rules unspoken. Don't push the new girl. Don't push anyone. And Damien's shadow? It loomed distant now, Brooklyn's sprawl a buffer, but she checked her phone less, the missed calls a fading echo. The monarch, for all its veiled teeth, felt rawer than that gilded cage. Lies had no purchase here. Survival did. Fran noticed. Of course he did. His protective instinct bloomed quiet, like a bruise under skin, unseen until pressed. It started small, a hand ghosting her elbow when a drunk slurred too close, steering her aside without a word. Then lessons, doled out in the lulls between rushes. "Chin up," he'd murmur one afternoon, demonstrating as he balanced a tray of empties. "Walk like the room owes you space. They smell hesitation." She tried it, shoulders rolling back, and felt the shift, the way heads turned not in pity, but acknowledgement. Evening sharpened the edge. A regular, red-faced and reeking of cheap cologne, pawed at her sleeve as she cleared his table. "Hey, doll, what's a girl like you doing in a dive like this?" His breath hot, fingers lingering. Amber froze, the old freeze, Damien's voice in her ear. "Don't make a scene, you're overreacting." But Fran's eyes met hers across the bar, steady as granite. "Your call," they said. "No rescue, just space." She straightened, channeling the walk he'd shown her, voice low and even. "The same as you, I guess. Trying not to spill my drink." The words landed flat, but firm. The man's laugh barked out, surprised, and he backed off, muttering into his glass. Fran slid her a fresh pour later, his nod fractional. "Good." But beneath the praise simmered something darker, a rage banked like coals under ash. She caught it in fragments, his jaw clenching when Marco mentioned a tale on some lowlife. the way his fingers drummed the counter like he was tallying debts. Unspoken, but there, a predator's focus, zeroed on a ghost she knew too well. From the office door, half ajar during inventory, Frank watched her navigate the floor. That flannel swallowing her frame but not her fire. She'd thickened a bit in the week, color returning to cheeks that had been ash. It stirred him, this quiet reclamation. But it was the echo of Lucia that hooked deepest. His sister, who'd scrubbed counters in their ma's diner, chin high even as the bruises yellowed. "I'll handle it, Frankie," she'd say, until she couldn't. He'd failed her, swore he wouldn't again. So while Amber wiped down the far booth, Frank leaned into his phone, voice a blade wrapped in silk. "Yeah, it's me. That name, Damien Hale, girlfriend's Amber Rose. Ex now from what I hear. Find him. Quiet. I want eyes, roots, the works." The line crackled, Marco's affirmation a grunt. Tracking wasn't protection, it was preparation. Men like that didn't fade. They festered. And Frank Costello didn't let festering touch what was his to guard. The rage was a constant hum now, fueling the Empire's gears. Shipments rerouted through the docks, alliances sealed in back rooms upstairs. But Amber? She was the outlier, the spark he couldn't afford to snuff. Teaching her to stand wasn't charity, it was investment. In her, in the reckoning to come. Night deepened, the bar thinning to stragglers and shadows. Amber lingered in the kitchen, stacking last call glasses, the clink a metronome to her thoughts. Marco hovered by the office door, phone to his ear, voice pitched low for the empty hour. "Yeah, boss says no one touches her. She's under his protection. You hear me? No one." The words hung, sharp as a blade's tip. Amber's hands stilled, water dripping from a tumbler to pool on the floor. Protection. The word twisted in her gut, sweet as honey, bitter as the dregs in her glass. She'd traded Damien's velvet noose for Fran's iron one, subtler perhaps, but no less binding. The monarch wasn't a sanctuary. It was a gilded trap, its bars inked in ravens and oaths. She set the glass down, deliberate, and slipped toward the back stairs. Safety had always been illusion. But this was a cage with teeth, and she was only just learning to bear her own. Amber's foot caught the first stair, the wood creaking under her like a withheld confession. Marco's voice lingered in the air behind her, a barb hooked deep, under his protection. The phrase coiled in her chest, warm as a brand, searing the fragile piece she'd stitched together. She climbed the rest of the way in the dark. The guest room's door clicking shut like a lock turning on its own axis. Outside, Brooklyn murmured its nocturnal secrets, tires hissing on wet asphalt, a distant siren wailing like a soul unmoored. But sleep evaded her, the cot's springs digging into her back as if to remind her, nowhere was truly soft. The phone buzzed once in the dead hour before dawn, a vibration that jolted her upright. Not hers, Lena's spare, pressed into her hands the day before with a muttered "use it if you need to call someone." Amber fumbled for it, the screen's glow harsh against the gloom. Unknown number. She almost silenced it, but curiosity, or masochism, won. The voicemail icon blinked, insistent. 3 messages. Heart hammering, she hit play, volume low as a breath. "Rose, baby, it's me. I know you're scared, but come on. We both said things we didn't mean. Just call me back. We can fix this." Damien's voice, that polished velvet, slithering through the speaker. Apology wrapped in silk, but the undercurrent twisted. Fix this. Like she was the fracture. The second, "Wherever you are, it's not safe out there. People like you, they get hurt. You know that." A pause, heavy with implication. Threat veiled as concern, the gaslight flickering anew. The third hit like a gut punch. "I talked to Sarah. She said you're at some dive in Brooklyn. The Monarch? Cute. I'll find you, Rose. We need to talk." Sarah, the friend she'd crashed with once. the one who'd promised silence. Betrayal burned hot in Amber's throat, the phone slipping from her fingers to the mattress. How? A careless word? A traced signal? It didn't matter. Damien's web was spinning again, threads tightening across the miles. Fear clawed back in, talons raking her ribs, the old paralysis seeping into her limbs. Run. The instinct screamed it, pack the flannel, slip out the back before the sun crested, vanish into the subways like smoke. Brooklyn was vast, but so was his reach. She'd learned that the hard way. Yet as the messages looped in her mind, a counter voice rose, forged in the bar's unyielding rhythm. Tired of running. 4 years of it, bolting from arguments, from doubts, from the mirror that lied back at her. The monarch, for all its shadows, had given her footing. Fran's lessons echoed, chin up, eyes steady. She wouldn't bolt, not this time. Let him come. She'd face the storm on ground she chose. From the alley's mouth, Frank watched the first light bruise the sky, a cigarette dangling unlit between his fingers. Marco had relayed the sighting an hour ago. Whispers from a street contact, a sleek sedan circling the block, driver with a face that matched the photo Frank had circulated. Damien Hale. The name tasted like ash, the kind that lingered after a fire you'd set yourself. His men were primed, shadows in the periphery. Vito on the rooftop across the street, binoculars trained. Tommy in the coffee shop opposite, nursing a black brew and a grudge. They itched for action. Let us handle it, boss. One word, and he's fish food in the East River. But Frank held them leashed, tight, not out of mercy. No. This was Amber's forge. He'd seen enough broken things in his line to know. Hand someone the hammer too soon, and they shatter under the weight. Let them swing it themselves, and something unbreakable tempers. Lucia had begged him once, "Don't. Frankie, I'll deal with him." Pride, he'd called it then. Foolishness in hindsight. But Amber? She carried that same flint, sparked but untested. He wanted to see if it caught, if it burned. The sedan ghosted by again at noon, slow as a shark scenting blood. Frank caught the glint from his perch behind the bar, the one-way mirror affording him the city's pulse without giving away his own. Eyes on him, he murmured into his earpiece, voice flat as polished stone. Marco's affirmative crackled back from the kitchen. The bar filled with its midday hum, workers grabbing quick bites, the jukebox crooning a torch song about lost lovers. But tension threaded the air, taut as a garrote. Amber moved through it like she hadn't heard the voicemails, but Frank saw the tells. Her grip white-knuckled on the rag. Eyes darting to the door, every third pore. Good. Awareness was the first weapon. He let her work, intervening only once when a regular's elbow brushed too close. A subtle shift of his bulk, enough to part the crowd like water. Her glance met his, grateful but guarded. "Your fight," his nod replied. Evening draped the streets in oil-slick shadows, the rain a memory replaced by a chill that bit through coats. The monarch thrummed fuller now, laughter edged with liquor, the blues saxophone weaving melancholy through the haze. Amber was behind the bar, sleeves rolled to her elbows, drawing a pint with hands that betrayed only the faintest tremor. The door swung open on a gust, and there he was, Damien stepping in like he owned the threshold. Tailored jacket, hair slicked just so, that smile a blade sheathed in charm. His eyes scanned, predatory, landing on her like a claim staked. The room didn't still, but it shifted, patrons sensing the charge, Marco's hand twitching toward his coat. Frank leaned against the office doorframe, arms crossed, a statue in the amber light. Watch, wait. Damien sauntered up, perching on a stool with casual grace, as if 3 hours of voicemails hadn't bridged a chasm. "Rose," he said, voice honey over gravel, loud enough to carry but pitched for intimacy. "There you are. Been worried sick." Her rag stilled mid-wipe, the bar top a sudden battlefield. Fear surged, a wave crashing cold. Run, hide, apologize. But she rooted herself, Fran's voice a ghost in her ear, chin up, hands trembling under the counter, eyes firm as flint. Damien. He leaned in, elbows on the oak, that smile cracking at the edges to reveal the venom beneath. Come on. Don't be like that. Sarah told me everything. How you're crashing here playing bartender. This place? It's a joke. You don't belong here scraping by in some hole with these types. His gaze flicked dismissively over the room, lingering on the inked arms at the far tables, the subtle bulges under jackets. The words landed like slaps, echoes of old arguments. You're better than this, Rose. Better than them. But the bar's honesty armored her now, the weight of eyes on her back, not judging, but witnessing. She set the rag down, deliberate, voice steady, despite the quake in her chest. You're right, I don't belong here. A beat, the air thickening. I belong anywhere you're not. His face twisted, charm fracturing into sneer, the mask slipping to show the rot. You think you can just walk, after everything I did? You're nothing without... He reached then, fingers snaking across the bar toward her wrist, the old grip flashing in his eyes. Time fractured. Amber recoiled, heart slamming, but before the contact sealed, Frank moved. Not a lunge, no dramatics, just a step from the shadows, his presence unfolding like a storm cloud eclipsing the sun. He loomed at Damien's shoulder, one hand flat on the counter, the other loose but ready. Their eyes met, Fran's cold as winter iron, promising depths no river could hold. No words, none needed. Damien froze, hand withdrawing like it had brushed flame. Color drained from his face, the sneer curdling to uncertainty. He slid off the stool, backing a step. 2. This isn't over, Rose, he muttered, venom spent. But the threat lingered like smoke. The door banged shut behind him, the bar exhaling in his wake. Amber's knees buckled against the cooler, breath coming in shards. Fran's gaze softened a fraction. Just for her. A nod. Fractional, approving. You swung. But as the door's echo faded, he turned to Marco, voice pitched low for the office shadows. Find him. Alive. The word hung, laced with a tone that carved mercy from the equation. Promising questions asked in dark rooms, answers extracted in blood. Outside, the sedan peeled away, taillights bleeding red into the night. But Damien's hunt wasn't sated. It was only sharpening its teeth. The taillights dissolved into the night like wounds closing over, but the metallic tang of adrenaline lingered in Amber's mouth, sharp as bitten copper. She pressed her back to the bar's scarred oak, the wood's grain imprinting ridges into her spine. Grounding her as the room's hum resumed, glasses clinking like distant chimes, laughter threading back in, fragile as spider silk. Damien's cologne hung in the air, a ghost's perfume, mingling with the bourbon's bite. Fran had vanished into the office shadows, his order to Marco a low thunder she hadn't caught, but the weight of it pressed the air thin. She poured herself a finger of whiskey, neat, the liquid's burn a tether against the shake in her hands. Eyes firm, she'd told herself, and they'd held, for a breath. But now, alone in the lull, the fracture lines spider-webbed. What if he'd lunged harder? What if Fran's look hadn't been enough? The monarch's warmth, once a balm, curdled now, its amber glow casting long claws across the floor. Protection. The word mocked her, a velvet noose tightening with every unanswered voicemail. Marco emerged from the kitchen then, wiping his hands on a rag stained with grease and regret, his squint deeper in the low light. He paused at her elbow, close enough she caught the faint whiff of machine oil and menthol from his gum. You good? Not pity, more like inventory checking stock after a storm. She nodded, too quick, the whiskey sloshing in her glass. Yeah, just echoes. The admission slipped out, raw-edged, surprising them both. He grunted, leaning on the counter, gaze drifting to the door as if expecting it to swing wide again. Silence stretched, companionable but edged, until he spoke. voice pitched for the empty hour. Seen that look before. On her. Boss's sister Lucia. The name landed soft, a pebble in still water, rippling out. Amber turned, the glass halfway to her lips forgotten. Marco wasn't one for stories. His words came in grunts and gestures, maps etched in scars. But tonight, with the bar's pulse slowed to embers, he unspooled it like a confession ode. Lucia was fire, sharp tongue, sharper laugh. Ran a little cafe up in Queens, the kind with checkered floors and pies that could mend a bad day. Fell for this guy, though. Charming prick, all smiles and promises till the doors closed. His jaw worked the gum, a rhythmic chew masking the grind beneath. Started small, words that cut without drawing blood, then the bruises. She hit him good, under sleeves and makeup, but we saw. Boss tried pulling her out, time and again. Come stay at the Monarch, he'd say. I'll handle him. But she wouldn't. Too proud or too scared. Thought love was the chain worth wearing. Amber's throat tightened, the whiskey's warmth turning leaden. She saw it too clearly. The slow erosion, the doubts blooming like mold in hidden corners. Like me, the thought whispered, unbidden. Last time, Marco trailed off, eyes distant, fixed on a knot in the wood. She called him late, voice breaking. He got there fast, drove like hell through traffic. Found her on the floor, ribs cracked, eyes swollen shut. Fought back, though, clawed his face to ribbons. A ghost of a smile tugged his lip, pride laced with ash. Bastard bolted, but not far, vanished by morning. Handled, we called it. River don't ask questions. The word hung, heavy as an anchor, handled. Not justice, not law, erased. Amber's pulse stuttered, a bird trapped in her chest. Fran's face flashed, the cold iron in his stare at Damien, the fractional nod of approval after. It fit now, the pieces slotting dark and inevitable. Lucia's ghost walked these floors, inked into his skin, fueling the calm that masked a storm. Why tell me? She asked, voice athread. Marco shrugged, pushing off the counter, the rag balled in his fist. Boss don't talk about her. But you got that same spark. He sees it, sees her. Just watch the strings, yeah? Loyalty here's thick as blood. He clapped her shoulder once, light but loaded, and melted back into the kitchen's shadows. Amber stood there long after, the glass sweating in her grip, Marco's words a burr under her skin. Moved, God, yes. The pain in Fran's unspoken silences, the guilt carving hollows under his eyes. It humanized him, stripped the myth to man. A brother too late, wielding an empire like a blunt instrument against the dark. But afraid? Bone deep. His darkness wasn't Damien's petty venom. It was a chasm, vast and devouring, where men vanished without echo. And the kindness? It came laced now, visible in the threads. Loyalty demanded in glances, silence bought with shared secrets, obedience woven into every nod. Stay in the lines or the raven's wings would close. Yet she didn't run. Not yet. The bar's honesty, brutal as it was, outshone the pretty poisons of before. Fran protected not from possession, but from a wound that mirrored her own. It pulled at her, this fractured kinship, a bridge over the abyss they both skirted. Hours bled into the small hours, the last patron stumbling into the night, leaving the Monarch to its bones. Amber lingered, wiping down the bar with rote motions, the rag tracing circles like incantations against the quiet. Fran emerged from the office at last, jacket slung over one arm. The cut on his hand fresh, a shallow slash across the knuckles, probably from some backroom negotiation gone verbal. Blood beaded dark, stark against the ink. Sit, she said, surprising herself, gesturing to a stool. He paused, brow arching, but complied, the wood creaking under his weight. The lamp above cast his face in half shadow, lines etched deeper in the fatigue, eyes heavy-lidded but alert, like a wolf feigning sleep. She fetched the first aid kit from under the register, gauze, tape, antiseptic that stung the air like pine. Her fingers brushed his as she took his hand, the skin warm, calloused, thrumming with restrained power. The cut wept slow, a thin red line amid the tattoos, thorns parting for a hidden rose, Latin fading into scar tissue. Memento mori. Up close, he smelled of smoke and steel. The faint undernote of cologne worn thin by the day. "This from him?" she asked, dabbing the wound, the cotton blooming crimson. He watched her work, unblinking, the silence a shared breath. "No, just business." A beat. The kind that bleeds. She taped it efficient, her touch steady despite the tremor in her chest. Marco's story a live wire between them. When she finished, his hand flexed, testing, then closed lightly over hers. Not a grab. A hold. "Thanks." The word hung soft, unguarded, pulling the air taut. Amber met his gaze, the storm clouds there softened to slate, tired and true. "You're not like the others," she said, the confession low, laced with the ache of recognition. Not cruel, not careless. Haunted. His thumb traced a fractional circle on her skin, gone before she could flinch. "Neither are you." The words landed quiet, a vow etched in the space between. For a heartbeat, the bar faded, the ghosts, the strings, the shadows clawing at the edges. Just them, two fractures aligning in the dim. He rose then, breaking the spell, jacket settling over broad shoulders like a shroud. "Lock up when you're done." The door to the stairs whispered shut behind him, leaving her with the echo of his warmth, the kit's metallic tang, and a pull she couldn't name. Dawn's gray fingers clawed the horizon when Amber slipped toward the back exit. The bar locked tight, her steps muffled on the stairs. The office door stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling like spilled secrets. Fran's voice drifted low, a blade honed in the hush. "He touched her once, he won't again." The line crackled, then silence, final, irrevocable. Amber froze. Breath trapped, the words carving cold through her veins. Not protection, retribution. The order hung there, a death sentence wrapped in care, Damien's name unspoken but etched in blood. Fran's guilt had found its altar, and she was the offering. Strings pulling taut, obedience the price of his ghosts. She backed away, silent as smoke, the stairs a retreat to the room that no longer felt like shelter. The raven watched from the walls, wings flared in eternal vigil. Kindness, she'd learned, always came collect. The stairs blurred under Amber's feet as she retreated, each step a echo of the order she'd overheard. He touched her once. He won't again. The words burrowed like thorns, twisting deeper with every creak of the wood. The guest room door slammed behind her, too loud in the pre-dawn hush, the sound rebounding off the walls like a gunshot in a confessional. She leaned against it, breath ragged, the air thick with the bar's ghosts. Bourbon's bite, brass polish, and now the copper tang of impending blood. Fran's voice replayed, low and lethal, a blade unsheathed for Damien's throat. For her. Sleep was a joke after that, a shallow grave she clawed out of before the sun could rise. The cot's springs dug like accusations, her mind a whirlwind of Marco's tale and Fran's touch, the warmth of his hand under her bandage, the slate soft, "Neither are you." Kinship, she'd thought. But this? This was ownership, forged in fire and finalized in ash. Lucia's shadow stretched long here, pulling Fran toward vengeance like a tide to the moon. And Amber? She was the current, unwitting, sweeping them both under. Dawn broke gray and grudging, the light seeping through the curtains like smoke from a dying fire. The bar below stirred, pots clanging in the kitchen, the espresso machine's hiss a serpent's warning. Amber descended when she couldn't bear the walls any longer, flannel hanging loose over jeans worn thin at the knees. Fran was at the counter, broad back to her, pouring grounds with mechanical precision. The cut on his hand flexed under the fresh tape, a red seam she'd sealed herself. Seeing it now twisted the knife, care given, trust bartered, and all for a noose disguised as a lifeline. She crossed the threshold, the floorboards groaning her approach. He turned, slow, eyes sharpening on her face, reading the storm there like weather inked on skin. Couldn't sleep? Casual, but the undercurrent hummed. What did you hear? The question died unspoken. Amber planted her palms on the oak, the grain biting into her flesh, grounding the rage bubbling up. I heard enough. Her voice cracked like thin ice, but she pushed on, the words spilling raw, unfiltered. On the phone. Last night. He touched her once. He won't again. That's not protection, Fran. That's murder. He stilled, the scoop of grounds hovering midair, coffee dust sifting to the counter like fallout. His jaw tightened, a muscle leaping under the shadow of stubble, but he set the canister down, deliberate, measured. Turned to face her fully, arms folding over his chest like a barrier of bone and ink. The air between them thickened, charged, the bars quiet, amplifying every breath. It's justice, he said, low, the gravel in his tone edging toward thunder. Men like him don't stop. They fester, spread. You think words fix that? A restraining order? He'll come back, Rose. Bruises today, a body bag tomorrow. The name, Rose, landed like a slap, intimate and invasive. Damien's pet name twisted in Fran's mouth. Heat flooded her cheeks, fury coiling tight in her gut. And you? What are you, the executioner? You think violence will fix it? The accusation flew sharp, honed on the night's terror. Marco's warnings, the fragile bridge they'd built now splintering underfoot. Fran's eyes darkened, storm clouds roiling to black. He stepped closer, the counter no longer a divide, his presence a wall of heat and restrained storm. Violence is the only language men like him understand. The words rumbled out, edged with a fury she'd only glimpsed before, in the cold stare at Damien, the fractional nod after her stand. But now it cracked open. Raw and unchecked, his hands unclenching to fists at his sides. I watched it with Lucia, begged her to leave, to run. She didn't, and when I got there... A fracture in his voice, the anguish bleeding through like ink in water. He dragged a hand over his face, the tape pulling taut, eyes squeezing shut for a beat. I was too late. Won't be again. Not with you. The admission hung, a wound laid bare, pulling at her resolve. She saw it then, the boy behind the boss, the brother who'd bartered his soul for a sister's ghost. Guilt carved him hollow, fueling the empire's gears, turning protection into possession. But it didn't absolve, didn't erase the strings, loyalty in every glance, silence sealing her lips, obedience the toll for his shield. This isn't about Lucia, she shot back, voice trembling but unyielding, stepping into his space until the air crackled between them. It's about you owning me, through protection. Damien controlled with words, made me small. You're no better, your world's just got sharper teeth. I didn't run from one cage to lock myself in another. Fury flashed in his eyes, hot and immediate, his frame vibrating like a wire pulled to snap. For a heartbeat, she thought he'd shatter the counter, unleash the storm he'd leashed for years. The monarch had been his fortress, control absolute, deals struck in whispers, threats silenced in shadows. No one challenged the raven's flight, but her words landed true, a mirror cracking the myth. His breath came harsh, chest rising sharp, and then it broke. The fury ebbed, draining to anguish, raw and exposed. He turned away, shoulders slumping under the weight. One hand gripping the edge of the sink like it was the only anchor. Damn you, Rose! The whisper cracked. The first fracture in the armor. Control slipping through his fingers like rain on glass. Years of iron will, empires built on unyielding ground, and here she was, unmaking him with truth. Silence swallowed them, heavy as the rain that threatened outside, pattering tentative against the panes. Amber's chest ached, torn between the pull of his pain and the push of her fear. He wasn't Damien, cruelty for sport, ego's blade. Fran was a blade forged in loss, wielded for ghosts. But the cost? Her freedom, bartered in blood, not her own. She couldn't live in that shadow, no matter how well it shielded. "Stop it," she said, softer now but steel beneath. Stepping around the counter, close enough to feel the heat radiating off him, the faint tremor in his frame. "Cancel the order. Let me handle my monsters. Or this, us, whatever it is, ends here." He turned back, eyes meeting hers. The slate fractured with doubt. Hesitation carved lines deeper into his face. The war visible. Lucia's echo screaming for vengeance. Amber's fire demanding choice. Seconds stretched, eternal. The coffee grounds forgotten. The bar holding its breath. Then a nod, fractional, agonizing. He pulled the phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over the screen like it burned. One tap, the line connecting with a faint click. "Marco, stand down. No go on Hale. Pull everyone off." The words rasped out, each one a concession, a chain shattered for her. The line died, and he set the phone down, deliberate, the weight of it echoing in the quiet. "For you." Relief flooded her, bittersweet, loosening the knot in her chest. She reached out, fingers brushing his arm, ink-warm skin, the pulse beneath steadying. A bridge mended, tenuous but true. "Thank you." But as the morning light strengthened, spilling gold over the counter, a shadow lingered, unseen. Fran pocketed the phone, jaw set, but Marco, loyal Marco, with his scarred knuckles and unyielding oaths, had heard the call, heard the hesitation, and in the kitchen's dim, where steam rose like ghosts, he'd made his own choice. Loyalty thicker than blood, debts unpaid. The raven flew solo sometimes. The next day broke sharper, the rain holding off as if the sky itself waited. Amber moved through the lunch rush on autopilot, trays balanced, smiles painted thin. Fran's concession lingered like a balm, the way his gaze softened when it caught hers. The fractional space he'd given her behind the bar. Control ceded, a turning point etched in the oak's grain. She almost believed it. A path forward, monsters leashed by choice, not chains. The news crawled in on Lena's radio, crackling from the kitchen like static from a storm front. Brooklyn PD investigating a vehicle fire on Kent Avenue. Black sedan, registered to Damien Hale, 32, torched beyond recognition. No body recovered. Authorities suspect arson. The tray slipped from Amber's hands, glasses shattering in a cascade of shards and foam, the sound exploding through the bar like gunfire. Time fractured, the room tilting, patrons' faces blurring into a watercolor smear. Torched. No body. Marco's grunt from the doorway, eyes averted. Fran's sudden stillness at the far end, hand pausing mid-pour. The phone forgotten in his pocket. Her world spun, gravity inverting, the fragile bridge crumbling to ash. He'd stopped, for her, but someone else hadn't. The raven's wings, once shelter, now closed like a trap, feathers tipped in flame. Damien's ghost burned, but the fire. It licked at her heels, promising no escape from the debts unpaid. The shards glittered like accusations under the lunch-hour lights, foam hissing into silence as it pooled around Amber's boots. The bar froze in that suspended breath, patrons mid-sip, forks hovering over half-eaten plates, the radio's crackle dying to static as Lena lunged to kill it. Damien's name echoed in her skull, torched and twisted. No body. The words looped, a noose cinching tighter, her knees buckling until the counter's edge bit into her palms. Marco's eyes flicked to hers from the kitchen door, a shadow of something unreadable. Guilt? Defiance, before he vanished into the steam. Fran moved first, crossing the floor in 3 strides, his bulk eclipsing the light as he steadied her with a hand to the elbow. Not a grip, a brace. "Breathe," he murmured, low for her ears alone. The gravel in his voice frayed at the edges. His eyes, slate dark, searched hers, questioning, but not prying. The concession from hours before hung between them, fragile as spun glass. For you. But this fire? It reeked of autonomy, a rogue spark in the machine he'd tried to douse. She pulled away, the contact burning now, her nod jerky. "I'm fine." A lie, threadbare, but the bar's rhythm demanded it. Trays cleared, apologies murmured to the stunned lunch crowd, the jukebox kicking back in with a blues riff that wailed like a dirge. Under it all, the weight settled. Marco's loyalty, thicker than oaths, had snapped the leash Fran had yanked. For Lucia, for the debt unpaid, it didn't matter. The flames had danced to their own tune, and now the smoke choked her lungs. The afternoon dragged heavy as wet wool, the news a specter at every glance. Amber wiped counters with mechanical fury, suds foaming under her nails like futile prayers. Guilt gnawed at the edges, Damien's sneer in the bar's amber glow, his reaching hand, the venom in his voice. Nothing without me. Had she wished this? In the dark hours, yes. Flashes of freedom unmarred by his shadow. But this erasure? It stained her, a complicity she hadn't sought. The possible death a stone in her gut, cold and unyielding. Fran's world had bled into hers, the raven's wings singeing what they'd meant to shield. Dusk bled purple into the windows when the storm broke. Not rain, but blue. Sirens wailed distant at first, a low keen rising to a howl that cut through the evening crowd's murmur. Tires screeched outside, doors slamming like punctuation marks, boots thudding on the pavement. The monarch's door burst inward, wood shuddering on hinges, floodlights spearing the dim like accusatory fingers. "Police! Hands where we can see 'em! Nobody moves!" Chaos erupted in heartbeats, stools toppling, glasses shattering anew, patrons scrambling for corners like roaches under glare. Uniforms flooded in, 6, then 10, badges glinting, guns drawn and steady, the air thickening with cordite and commands. "On the ground! Now!" A detective in plainclothes, paunch straining his shirt, zeroed on Fran, badge flashing like a verdict. "Frank Costello, you're under arrest. Obstruction, conspiracy. Tip says you torched a sedan on Kent last night. Hale's ride. Care to explain?" Fran's face was stone, unreadable as he raised his hands slow, deliberate, the ink on his arms coiling like serpents roused. The bar's pulse stuttered to halt, Marco's face paling in the kitchen pass-through, Lena's hands frozen on the register. Amber's breath caught, the room tilting as cuffs clicked cold around Fran's wrists, the detective's grip yanking him toward the door. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just a glance over his shoulder, locking on her through the fray. "Stay clear." The message etched in his eyes, a final command wrapped in plea. They dragged him out, the cruiser's lights pulsing red-blue across the oak. Sirens devouring the night. The raid lingered, a desecration, detectives combing shelves for ledgers, patting down coats for heat. Questions barked like bullets. "You see anything last night? Costello's crew moving funny?" Amber was herded to a booth, the leather cold against her spine, a female officer's notebook poised like a blade. Under the fluorescent glare, she spun half-truths. New hire, didn't see much. Her voice steady, but her mind a maelstrom. The tip. It gnawed, piecing together in flashes. Marco's averted eyes at the radio's crackle, his unyielding grunt after Fran's call to stand down. Loyalty thicker than blood. Not to the boss's whim, but to the ghost of Lucia, the unpaid ledger. Someone in the circle, his circle, had whispered to the badges, trading the fire for a cleaner burn. Betrayal, coiled tight as the raven's talons, turning inward. The officer's pen scratched, probing deeper. "Costello vouch for you? Said you were clean in his statement?" Fran's doing, even in irons, shielding her, his men, the fragile web with his name alone. Guilt surged anew, twin to the Damien rot, his arrest a noose she'd helped knot, her confrontation the fracture that let Marco slip the blade. For you, he'd said, canceling the order. But the sins? They drowned them both now, the monarch's warmth curdled to ash. Hours bled into midnight, the raid's husk lingering. Furniture askew, questions echoing hollow. Amber locked the door at last, the key trembling in her fist, the bar a tomb of toppled chairs and spilled secrets. Upstairs, the guest room felt vast and vacant, the cot's sheets rumpled from nights that now seemed stolen. She paced, the floorboards creaking her unrest, until a shadow stirred at the window. Not light, but movement. A figure below, hooded against the chill, slipping through the alley like smoke. Fran. Uncuffed, but marked, the jacket torn at the cuff, a fresh bruise blooming under his eye like a signature. He shouldn't be here. Bail, a favor called in shadows, but the raven flew free on borrowed wings. She met him at the back door, the lock yielding with a reluctant snick, the night air rushing in cold and conspiratorial. He stepped inside, close enough she caught the faint reek of precinct coffee and restraint, his frame filling the narrow hall. No words at first, just his hand, rising to brush her cheek, thumb tracing the faded purple from Damien's ghost. The touch lingered, soft as ash, eyes heavy with the weight of what he'd shouldered. They're tying it to me, the car. The tip was inside, Marco probably, doesn't matter, I took the fall, keeps the heat off you, off the crew. Amber's throat closed, the guilt a tide rising, Damien's flames, Fran's cuffs, the betrayal's bitter chain. You can't just... Listen. He cut her off, voice low, urgent, the anguish from their fight resurfacing, rawer now in the dim. He cupped her face, calloused palms framing her like fragile glass, the tape on his knuckles peeling at the edges. Leave Brooklyn. Tonight if you can. Bus to Jersey, train north. Doesn't matter. Start clean. Her breath hitched, the words a blade to the fragile bridge they'd mended. And you? This place? His gaze fractured, the storm clouds breaking to rain, regret, not rage. The monarch's mind to burn if it comes to it, but you... A pause, thumb stilling on her skin, the silence a chasm. If you stay, you'll drown in my sins. The raids, the debts, they creep. Swallow everything. The alley's chill seeped through the cracks, mirroring the hollow in her chest. She leaned into his hold, just once, the warmth of farewell she couldn't voice. And if I go? He held her eyes, the slate softening to something achingly human. Hope, perhaps, or the ghost of it. You'll live. The words landed soft, a benediction carved from bone, his hand falling away as if it cost him to let go. Before she could answer, before the plea or the promise could form, he turned, melting into the shadows of the alley, the back door whispering shut behind him like a sealed vow. The raven's wings carried him off, into the night that claimed its own. Amber stood there, the echo of his touch fading, the guilt and the ghosts pressing in. Live. The word burned. A spark in the dark, but the fire? It would have to wait for dawn. The back door's whisper lingered in Amber's ears long after Fran's shadow dissolved into the alley's ink, his words a talisman etched in frost. You'll live. She stood there until the chill seeped through her flannel, numbing fingers that still ghosted the warmth of his palm on her cheek. Live. The command pulled at her like a current, urging her from the monarch's maw, its oak counters scarred with secrets, its amber glow now a pyre's echo. She packed light. The borrowed sweater, a journal she'd started in stolen moments, the faint scent of bourbon clinging to her skin like regret. By midnight, the bus station's fluorescent hum swallowed her, Brooklyn shrinking to a bruise on the horizon as Vermont's green veil unspooled ahead. Months carved themselves slow and deliberate, like frost etching window panes. She surfaced in a mill town called Elmwood, hills rolling soft under autumn's gold, the air crisp with pine and earth turned over. No more Rose, just Eliza Hart, the name on a forged ID Fran had slipped into her purse that final night, a raven's feather inked on the corner like a promise or a curse. The apartment was a garret above a bakery, flour-dusted winds sneaking through cracks, the bed a nest of quilts that muffled the city's absence. Peace settled tentative, a thin skin over the wound, but it held. Lucia's garden bloomed from that fragile truce. The shopfront caught her eye on a whim. A narrow storefront on Main Street, windows fogged with neglect, the sign above peeling like old bark. She poured what savings she'd scraped into it, shelves of clay pots heavy with soil, buckets brimming with snapdragons and hellebores, their petals a riot of crimson and cream against the white clapboard walls. The name slipped out unbidden, a nod to the ghost Marco had conjured. Lucia, fire and fragility, thorns hidden in bloom. Customers trickled in, locals with calloused hands seeking bulbs for victory gardens, tourists snapping photos of the window boxes she'd coaxed to life. "Smells like hope in here," an old widow murmured once, fingering a bundle of lavender, and Amber, Eliza, smiled, the curve of it genuine, if tentative. The till rang soft, the shears snipped clean, and for stretches of daylight, the world narrowed to petals unfurling, roots delving deep. Healing wove through the quiet hours, thread by careful thread. Evenings, after the last customer departed and the sun bled orange across the hills, she'd curl in the garret with the journal, its pages filling with ink that bled like confessions. October 15th. Laughed today at the way the asters nod in the wind. Felt real, not borrowed. Words poured out. The gaslights flicker in Damien's eyes, the burn of Fran's concession, the raid's chaos shattering glass like trust. No polish, just raw edges, the pens scratch a rhythm against the ghosts. Saturdays brought the survivors group, a circle of folding chairs in the community hall, faces marked with echoes of her own, a teacher with a scar like a crescent moon, a nurse whose laugh cracked like dawn through clouds. They shared in murmurs, triggers named like enemies, boundaries drawn like battle lines. "You're not broken," the facilitator would say, voice steady as roots, and Amber would nod, the words sinking slow, fertilizing soil she'd thought barren. Laughter returned in fits, a snort over burnt scones from the bakery below, a full-throated guffaw at a customer's tale of a deer raiding her dahlias. It felt foreign at first, rusty as an old hinge, but it loosened something in her chest, allowing breath where fear had squatted. Yet peace was a jealous lover, easily startled. Memories haunted the margins. Damien's sneer fracturing in the monarch's glow, the radio's crackle announcing flames that might have claimed him whole. Guilt lingered, a low hum under her skin. No body meant no closure, just the specter of complicity, Marco's betrayal a mirror to her own fractures. And Fran? He walked her dreams unbidden, slate eyes softening in the dim, his hand falling away like autumn leaves. "You'll live. A benediction or a severance?" She'd wake with the journal clutched tight, the garret's shadows pooling like spilled ink. Some days, paranoia pricked sharper. Black cars idled at curbs, sleek sedans with tinted windows, engines purring like distant thunder. A Lincoln once lingering too long outside the shop, the driver's profile obscured but familiar in its stillness. She'd freeze mid-arrangement, shears hovering over stems, pulse kicking up as if the raven's wings brushed the air. "Just a tourist," she'd whisper, forcing her hands to steady, but the glance over her shoulder became reflex, a survivor's sixth sense. Elmwood's peace cradled her, but Brooklyn's undercurrent tugged, a tide that never fully receded. One evening in late March, as thaw softened the earth and crocuses dared the flower beds, the shadow returned. Dusk draped the street in lavender hush. Gas lamps flickering to life along Main, the shop's windows glowing warm against the chill. Amber knelt by the front display, sweeping shards of glass from a pane shattered sometime in the night. Vandals, the sheriff guessed, bored kids with rocks and grudges, the fracture spiderwebbing like bad luck. The broom's bristles rasped against the sill, her breath fogging the air, when movement caught her eye. A figure at the curb, broad-shouldered but subdued, emerging from a nondescript gray sedan that blended into the twilight like camouflage. Fran, time folded, the broom slipping from her fingers to clatter on the boards. He looked altered, older, the lines at his eyes etched deeper by months or miles. The jaw clean-shaven now, stripping the shadow that had armored him. No jacket slung careless, just a wool coat, buttoned neat, hands gloved against the spring bite. His hair, once slicked with intent, fell softer, touched with silver at the temples like frost on thorns. He crossed the street unhurried, gaze fixed on the broken pane, not her, yet the air shifted, charged with the weight of unsaid miles. She rose, dust clinging to her jeans, heart a wild thing against her ribs. The door's bell tinkled soft as he stepped in, the shop's scents enveloping him. Hyacinth sweetness, soil's dark promise. No words. He moved to the window, crouching where she'd knelt, fingers tracing the fracture's edge with a mechanic's care. From his coat pocket came a roll of tape, a putty knife, tools pulled like instincts. He worked in silence. Glazier's steady rhythm, shards cleared, frame sealed, the pane's maw patched provisional against the night. Amber watched from the counter, arms folded tight, the space between them a chasm bridged by memory alone. His hands, once banded with fresh cuts, moved sure but slower, the ink peeking at his cuffs like faded tattoos, stories half told. The patch held, glass gleaming makeshift under the lamplight. He straightened, dusting his gloves, and only then did his eyes meet hers. Slate softened to mist, holding questions he wouldn't voice. The unspoken flooded the quiet, the raid's echo, Marco's fall. Whispers in survivor circles spoke of a trial, a plea for lesser sins. The flames that had reshaped them both. Regret, perhaps, or the ghost of what might have rooted in Brooklyn soil. Gratitude, tangled with the ache of severance. She broke first, voice a whisper roughened by disuse. "Do you still hurt people?" He paused at the door, hand on the frame, the bell's potential jingle held in abeyance. The answer came low, unadorned, carrying the weight of oaths renewed. "Only the ones who deserve it." The bell chimed then, soft as a sigh, as he stepped back into the dusk. The gray sedan pulled away, taillights winking like fireflies into the hills. Amber lingered at the window, fingers brushing the fresh patch, solid if scarred. The shop's warmth pressed at her back, Lucia's blooms nodding in the breeze. Peace, haunted still, but deeper now. You'll live. The words bloomed, roots finding purchase in Vermont's quiet earth. Chapter 9. The Final Redemption. The bell's chime echoed into silence as Fran's silhouette receded, the gray sedan vanishing around Elmwood's Bend like a memory dissolving in mist. Amber, Eliza, stood rooted at the threshold, the shop's door ajar, March's breath carrying the faint exhaust of his departure. The patched pane gleamed behind her, a scar mended with quiet intent, mirroring the fractures she'd learned to seal herself. Only the ones who deserve it. His words lingered, a half-answer laced with the old shadows, Lucia's ghost, Marco's fall, the flames that had torched more than Damien's sedan. Justice, he'd call it, but the moral rot clung, violence's cost, etched in the hollows under his eyes, the silver threading his temples. She'd asked, and he'd answered true. But truth was a door cracked, not flung wide. She closed the shop early that night, the crocuses left nodding in twilight, their purple throats open to the stars. The garret above the bakery waited, quilts rumpled, journal splayed on the nightstand like an unfinished letter. Sleep came in fits, the survivors' group words a mantra against the pull. Healing isn't linear, its roots in cracked soil. Dawn found her at the window, coffee steaming in a mug chipped like old porcelain, watching the hills stir under a tentative sun. Peace held, but Fran's shadow had stirred the silt. Freedom's illusion, control's echo. She'd rebuilt here, petal by petal, laugh by laugh. Yet love, if that's what it had been, demanded reckoning. Not rescue, but choice. 2 days passed in the shop's rhythm, arranging tulips in defiant reds, their stems slicing water like blades sheathed in silk, when the bell tinkled again, unhurried. No customers this early, the street still slept under spring's lazy veil. Fran stood there. Coat the same wool gray, but now with a slim envelope in his gloved hand, the paper crisp as fresh snow. He looked smaller in the daylight, the clean-shaven jaw softening the lines, age and absence carving him into something quieter, less thrown. The raven's ink peeked at his cuff, faded but indelible. Eliza, he said, the new name testing foreign on his tongue, a concession to the life she'd claimed. No questions about the shop, the name above the door. Lucia's echo, a quiet theft of fire from his ghosts. He stepped inside, the hyacinths parting scent for him, and extended the envelope, fingers brushing hers in the exchange. Inside, papers, official and unyielding. New passport, social security, etched fresh. A bank draft modest but clean. Freedom forged in backroom favors, the old identity torched like Damien's ride. No one can find you now, he said, voice low, the gravel smoothed by months or miles. His eyes held hers, slate warm to riverstone, weighted with the unsaid, raids weathered. The monarch shuddered under new hands. Marco's sentence a ledger closed in iron bars. Not even me if that's what you want. The words landed soft, a key turned in a lock she'd long since picked herself. Freedom versus control. His protection had cost her the cage of Brooklyn's sins, but here, in Lucia's garden, she'd bartered for wings unclipped. She folded the papers away, the draft's weight a promise against the till's modest chimes. It is, she whispered, not cruel, but clear. Choice, not chains. The thematic fracture mended. Violence as justice had scarred them both, but healing bloomed in the refusal to let it define. He nodded, fractional. The anguish from their ultimatum a ghost now, subdued. Walk with me? Not a command, an invitation, threads of the old pull woven loose. The river waited at Elmwood's edge, a lazy coil under budding willows, the water murmuring secrets over smooth stones. They followed the path in silence at first, boots crunching gravel, the air thick with everything unsaid. Damien's flames, the raid's shatter, the bandage she'd tied in the monarch's dim. Fran's pace matched hers, unhurried, the wool coat brushing her arm like an accidental vow. Spring's thaw softened the banks, mud yielding underfoot, a metaphor for the ground they'd trod, once iron-hard, now fertile with regret. She broke the hush first, voice threading the breeze. You taught me how to fight. The words carried the bar's echo. Chin up, eyes steady, the swing against Damien's sneer. Not with fists, but fire, the spark he'd fanned from Lucia's ashes, now hers to wield. He paused at the water's lip, stones skipping from his fingers into the current, ripples spreading like confessions. The river caught the light, silver flashes mirroring the ink on his skin, thorns parting for roses unseen. You taught me why it matters. His reply came slow, weighted, the gravel cracking on the edges. Anguish flickered, brief as a shadow, the cost of revenge, the violence that had claimed Marco's freedom as surely as Damien's ghost. Love as choice, not the rescue he'd offered in the monarch's amber cage, but the letting go that freed them both. Survival wasn't the end. Rebuilding was the quiet triumph. roots delving where storms had scoured. They stood there, the conversation a bridge of pauses, the river's murmur filling the gaps. No pleas, no promises, just the weight lifted, fractional, the air between them thinning to breath alone. He turned then, eyes holding hers one last beat, the slate clear of storms. A nod, almost imperceptible, and he walked away, the path curving him from view like a page turned. Back at the shop, the envelope waited on the counter amid the day's arrangements, tulips defiant, lavender a hush of forgiveness. Tucked beneath, a single red rose, stem thornless, petals velvet as a whispered absolution. No note, none needed. She lifted it, the scent blooming faint against the hyacinths, a final thread. Love chosen, not imposed. Dusk deepened to indigo, the hills cradling the first snow, a tentative flurry, flakes drifting like ash from a fire long banked. Amber stood at the window, rose in hand, the glass cool against her brow. The world outside blurred white, Elmwood's lights winking through the veil, Lucia's blooms bowing graceful in the chill. She whispered to the gathering dark, the words a seal on the scars. Some doors don't open to save you. They open to show you that you were strong enough to walk away. Fade to black,